Hi students, we are going to discuss in this video, where did sociology come from? So sociology is a very new discipline to be learning about in college. Very new, of course, over the course of history is what I mean. Because in ancient Greece, when you went to the academy in ancient Greece and Aristotle was your teacher, or Plato, or any of the other famous Greek scholars that you have learned about in philosophy class or in history class, those folks were teaching things like math and history and even astronomy and other sciences, language arts, religion. Those kinds of topics were all covered in ancient Greece in the academy. And so that's the origin of this college system that we have in Western culture today. But sociology wasn't part of it, because really sociology is fairly new if you look at the origins of college as being in ancient Greece. We've only been around about 150 years, and it's really only been about 120 years ago that it really kind of caught on and people started saying, you know what, yeah, there is something to sociology. So in world history, you've also heard about something called the Enlightenment. And in the Enlightenment, it's famous for the fact that people stopped making reference to themselves in terms of God or a Judeo-Christian God controlling the world, setting the rules for the world, and establishing the rules for society, for instance. Prior to the Enlightenment, human beings in Western culture, for the most part, looked to Almighty God for the source of control in society. And when the Enlightenment hit, when that period of history came, people kind of stopped looking at that and started looking more inward toward themselves and what man, human beings that is, has created, which is society, and started looking at society over time as being the source of rules, being the source of norms and morality and traditions, and that this was the thing that kind of controlled human social behavior rather than the old way of looking at things. And so I've had some students in the past talk about how they are very religious in modern day, they're Christians and they're very religious in modern day, and that some people have told them that sociology is the kind of class that can make you give up your religion. Well, we're not here to do that, but it is true that sociology proposes an alternative to that idea that God is in control with rules that all of us must follow, and at least proposes, if not a replacement for that idea, at least a close second, that society is this macro level thing with a structure, like we discussed last week, that we all have to navigate and we all have to follow, and that's the source of rules, and that's the source of the pattern to our lives. And really, the first fellow in sociology history who was really successful in taking this idea to the mainstream is Emile Durkheim. He's one of the many, many, many people you will read about in chapter 1 who are really significant figures historically in sociology, in the field of sociology. He is not the father of sociology, not according to sociology's history, but really according to world history. Emile Durkheim can really be credited with the first successful push to have sociology accepted very, very widely and taken seriously as an academic discipline. And he was alive about 125 or so years ago, was when he was really publishing. I mean, he lived longer than that, but he was really publishing a whole bunch of his work that we really use today. We're going to talk about it this week in proving or convincing folks that society is this thing that's bigger than ourselves, more powerful than ourselves. It has rules, it has a structure, it has a system to it. And you and I are part of that system, but we are subject to that system. And so that's kind of how the Christian pattern is, with God as the person who is in control. And in sociology, we suggest that society is in control, at least in conjunction with God, if not as a replacement to that model. So we're going to look at Emile Durkheim this week, and also, or instead of saying also, I should say in particular, what we're going to look at is his concept that he talked about called a social fact. Now, in a recent video, you learned about something called the sociological imagination. That is a term that was coined in the middle of the 20th century. Emile Durkheim was talking about the concept of social facts way back at the end of the 19th century. Okay, so that's the time frame that we're talking about. But Emile Durkheim and Charles Horton, not Charles, Wright Mills. Sorry, Wright Mills is the guy who came up with the sociological imagination in the middle of the 20th century. If he and Emile Durkheim had had a conversation over coffee before they talked about the sociological imagination idea or the social facts idea, they probably would have merged their ideas together and come up with a unified, a unified effort to talk about these things. So think, in other words, think of social facts as not truthful absolutes that you must accept in a society or a social setting, but rather think of social facts as a pattern that exists in society. And since society is different from one place to the next, the pattern of social facts will be different from one place to the next. So the word fact, you might know by itself as a word that means the truth or an absolute or something like that. In this particular case, where we say social fact, we're talking about patterns that exist at the cultural level, patterns that exist at that macro level in society that govern the way we think, we act, we behave, the ideas that we have. It governs all of these, even the emotions that we have. There are patterns that we inherit at birth, being a member of our society, or we inherit when we move to a society different than our own. And so it's a pattern way of thinking, feeling, and acting that exists at that society level. And as we're born into that society or coming into that society and learning the new ways of that society, we ourselves are judged by, we are compared by the thinking, feeling, and acting of everybody around us and how we behave. It controls our behavior on the micro scale. So, for instance, I think I used marriage and marriage patterns as an example in class last week. In the United States, marriage is a social institution that is the foundation for a lot of the legal system and who has rights of inheritance and who has rights to be covered on your insurance policy at work and other kinds of things like that, who gets your Social Security and that kind of thing. So marriage is a key legal element of a lot of different economic things and wealth things that exist in society, in our society. In our society, the pattern of marriage that we follow is monogamy, where two and only two people may be married to each other at the same time. And if those two people no longer want to be married to each other and want to be married to somebody else, they have to legally dissolve that marriage before they can get a second spouse, legally dissolve that one before they can get a third spouse, etc. And so in other societies, there are different patterns of thinking about marriage, and therefore someone with multiple spouses simultaneously might not be unusual in another society. It is not allowed in our society, therefore it governs our behavior on the micro scale. Even if you wanted to have multiple spouses simultaneously, you cannot. You legally cannot. We don't have anything called polygamy in the United States. As a matter of fact, if somebody tries to sneak in and have two or more legal marriages simultaneously, it is a crime called bigamy. So we have in our society and in all other societies something called a social fact. The social facts we should say plural, social facts, because I just used one example of marriage as a social fact, but it's a pattern way of thinking, feeling, and acting that we learn about subtly, accidentally, as we grow up and pass through our different stages of life in our society. We learn these patterns, and therefore they begin to feel natural, or we might think of them as something that comes naturally to human behavior, but no, there really isn't anything natural about human behavior except those things that we share in common with animals. We have to eat, sleep, pee, poop, that kind of stuff, right? That comes naturally, but the process through which we do those things, we accomplish those things, is very different from one place to the next. So social facts, this is a concept that Emile Durkheim came up with, and we're going to talk this week about how he used a really significant point in human history, the Industrial Revolution. He used a really significant point in history, that event, which took about 100 years, to look at the way he looked at source documents that were kept at the city and the national level about crime statistics, death statistics, and these kinds of things. He looked at the way social facts changed abruptly during the Industrial Revolution when urbanization took place. And these concepts are described in your reading assignment in chapter 1. Industrialization meant that urbanization was going to take place. And so in the next video, we're going to look at how Emile Durkheim was successful in proving to people that society has a macro scale structure, and that society's structure guides our behavior and our life outcomes on the micro scale. And he used historic data to prove this. And so in his research format, he looked at existing documents, just statistics that were kept at hospitals and churches. Those were the places that kept statistics at that time, at the end of the 19th century. And so he looked at the history there that was kept on record and came to some very convincing conclusions about the power that the macro scale structure of society has, the pattern of social facts that the macro scale structure of society has over us as individuals on the micro scale. On the micro scale. So in the next video, we're going to look at that Industrial Revolution and what Emile Durkheim observed about the historic records surrounding it. And I will see you then. Bye.